Our speaker tonight is Pete Klismet. He is a two-tour Navy Vietnam veteran. He served 9 years with the Ventura Police Department in California and was appointed a special agent with the FBI, where among other positions, he was in the first cadre of special agents trained in psychological profiling, which he'll be speaking about tonight. He also was the 1999 International Law Enforcement Officer of the Year, which sounds incredibly impressive to me. After he retired from active law enforcement, he taught as an associate professor of the Criminal Justice Department at Pikes Peak Community College, just down the road at Colorado Springs. And he continues to do training and consulting work for law enforcement, private companies, and law firms. He's written 4 books, including FBI Diary, Profiles of Evil, and Profiling Violent Crime, a Behavioral and Forensic Approach. Pete will give us a quick overview of what he wants to cover tonight and then kind of go into his presentation. I'll note that he'll probably answer most of your questions throughout the course of things. He's done this presentation often, and as he said, he's heard a lot of questions by now. So hopefully he will have covered the questions you have. But if you do have questions, send them to me, preferably privately, on the chat button at the bottom of the screen. Just send them directly to me, and I will pass them on after Pete finishes his presentation. So we'll go, roughly 45 minutes or so into the program, and then I'll sort through the questions, and what time we have left, I can pass those on to Pete. So Pete, if you're all ready, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Bruce. I appreciate it. And Margaret, for all of your commentary and interest. I enjoyed it. You've got people here from Utah, New Mexico, certainly Colorado, and Wyoming. Anybody here from Wyoming? Nobody got out to that. Has anybody here taken any
Pete, your bandwidth is really low. If you could, maybe you could take your picture off and we could just look at you with I think we have to just take your picture off, and then we can have you just talk. Maybe your voice would come through better.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, Margaret, are we ready? I can't hear you now.
Okay, Pete, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, what we're gonna need to do is just make sure we can hear you. So
okay.
If you do want to use that little icon down at the bottom left that says stop video, we might try just listening to your voice for a while and see how it goes.
Okay.
For some reason it's buffering and we're not able to see and hear you. So
okay,
let's try.
Yeah, we're all learning this stuff right now. I've done it several times for different reasons, but let me give it a try. Okay, I see my name.
Yeah, thank you. Let's give this a try and just see how it goes. Thank you.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Chris Goff, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, that's wonderful. As long as you can hear me, then I'm all ready to go. Well, the reason I asked about Romance Writers of America is because for the last 3 summers, I originally signed up for a 1-year contract, and they said, well, you're not going to get any more than 1 year, so you better do a good job. Oh, okay, I'll do the best. I can. So anyhow, I did the first session, I guess it was 10, 12 weeks. I don't remember. And lo and behold, they came back and said, would you do another one, please? Seems to generate a lot of interest. I said, sure. But they said, you won't get another contract. You know, I mean, they were nice, but I said, oh, that's fine. You know, I enjoy doing it. So it's up to you. So got done with the second one, which was probably a little better than the first one. I was better prepared. And they decided, well, can we do a third one? Because they had like 50 people in each session. And wow, it was well before Zoom days. So a lot of it was written and printed out. But if you had taken either or any one of those threes, then you would have a massive amount of information on the topic of criminal profiling. Okay, so why am I blabbering about that? Well, because what I'm going to try to compact here is a class I used to teach for a full semester, 45 classroom hours into 45 minutes. Can't be done. I'll do my best. I'll get the points across that I think are probably most important. Also, I don't know if anybody's a member of RWA, Romance Writers of America, but when I first signed up for that, I started looking at their website a little bit. And I found out, they said, okay, so what you have to do if you want to find the class that you're teaching, you have to go to Romance Writers of America. And then I believe it was the Kiss of Death chapter. That's pretty romantic, right? And then thirdly, you have to go to the Coffin group. And I thought, man, there's got to be a subtitle to this. What is it, Blood and Guts or something? You know, this is all very romantic to me, but in any event, I thought it was pretty funny. So in any event, thanks again, if I didn't say it, for inviting me to do a presentation. And I want to start out doing something a little different than what I have done before. I want to give you the fact pattern of a case which I actually worked on and helped solve quite a number of years ago. And this was back in a small town of West Branch, Iowa. In the event anybody is familiar with that area back there, it's, I don't know, 30 miles east of Iowa City, University of Iowa. And it's the town proper, I don't know, maybe a mile, 2 miles north of the Interstate 80. So it's kind of an isolated little town. It's a relatively small farming community, as many are out in Iowa, in particularly eastern Iowa. Okay, so what we have to deal with as part of the fact pattern is we've got a family of 5 people. And we'll call it the Roth, R-O-T-H family. We've got a mom, mother of 3 kids, a 19-year-old daughter, 14-year-old daughter, and a 12-year-old son. And then fitting into that group is a stepfather, Mr. Roth. I don't remember his first name, but Mr.'s good. And he had been a member of the family for 5 or 6 years, had married the mother. And so none of the kids were his, quote unquote. He inherited all 3 of the kids. So as the story goes, I taught a class on kind of an introduction to profiling class in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where I was stationed at the time. And that was a one-day kind of an introduction. Here's what we're doing with this. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we would like to do for you if we can do it. And so anything we can do to help, then we will. Fine, I got the whole class done for that day, and that was pretty much the end of it. I figured, well, I'll never hear anything. Bad idea, because 2 days later, the phone rings, and it's one of the DCI agents, Division of Criminal Investigation for the state of Iowa, so state agent, Rick Siwasik, and he called me and said, Pete, I was in that class a couple days ago. I said, yeah, I remember that, Rick. And he said, have you heard about the homicide that we've got down here in West Branch? I said, yeah, I saw something on the news, and then I saw something in the paper, but I'm not really, aware of all the facts. And he said, well, let me tell you what we've got. And he said, we've got a 19-year-old girl, which was the 19-year-old daughter of the family that I talked about. And they all lived there in West Branch. I believe they lived in kind of a rundown trailer by a convenience store, gas station. Anyhow, we have her body found on a country road north of town. North of town. She has 3 bullet holes in her back and 2 bullet holes in the back of her head. Her body is frozen, or was frozen. They had since, in the intervening 2 or 3 days, taken her body and had an autopsy done, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But so we are now about, I'll say a mile, 2 miles north of town, where the body was found on a county road, which was snowpacked, maintained, frequently used. It was not like a super highway or anything, but for farm country, it was one of their important roads. So a lot of traffic on the road. Okay, so the other thing that I found out was the girl's head was pointed toward town. In other words, her feet were facing north. Her head was facing south toward West Branch. And interestingly enough, there was a pair of gloves, mittens, or something of that nature that were put under her head and then covering her body from about the hips up to the shoulders was a men's jacket, or actually a men's heavy coat. Okay, so so the body had not been, there was no effort to hide the body or to do anything unusual with the body. The autopsy revealed that there was no sexual assault committed, and there was money found in her pockets, or in a pocket, thus probably showing there was no robbery involved in the crime. So considerations were by the sheriff's department and Rick, well, did we have somebody get off the freeway and then come into town and need to get some gas or other provisions at the convenience store and somehow ran into her, because the family had said she left the trailer and walked over to the convenience store to get a pack of cigarettes. And they had not seen her since then. This was at probably 10:30 at night, so kind of late. So did somebody come up from the interstate, which is a couple of miles on into town, to the convenience store to get some gas and snacks and perhaps run into her, somehow decided to get her in the car, take her out to the country and kill her? I don't know if that seems like a plausible but somewhat logical theory, to start with. That's not an unreasonable thought in my mind, and was not then. Okay. Now, given the fact pattern that we've got, what I would like you to do is to kind of hold on to those thoughts for the time being. Let me go through some of the things I've got here that may expand on or maybe explain a little bit more about some of the things that we look for in doing criminal profiles. So people wonder what profiling is. I get a lot of questions. I mean, I've done, I don't know how many talks, certainly well over 100, to law enforcement groups, to civilian groups, you name it. Was invited over to Romania several years ago by the Attorney General of the country, which was interesting, and gave a talk there for several days at a seminar to, I don't know, 200 other prosecutors from the country of Romania. And just a couple of years ago, 350 or 450 people down in Dallas, Texas at a homicide convention. So I pretty much have heard every question you could possibly get about what is criminal profiling. So the answer to that is what we do with criminal profiling is not magic, it's not crystal ball, it's a lot of things that mind reading or anything like that. Ouija boards, right? Some of us of my generation, most of you probably aren't there yet, realize what a Ouija board is, and that's kind of how we were thought of. This original group of profilers, when we went out into the field, it was like, kind of like, woo, here they are. It's like witchcraft or something. But what we were trained in and what we do is to look for behavioral clues to try to identify an offender in a violent crime, and that also the second part of that could be a crime of sexual violence. Okay, so I've had a lot of people, including one of my special agent in charge in Omaha, say, "Well, Klismet, you're profiling me," and people will say that, and he was serious. That's not my job. I've responded to that many times. Are you profiling me? And I would reply back, you're profiling me. We're all profilers. Why do I say that? Because when we meet somebody or when we're talking to somebody, or you in the audience right now are forming an impression of me based on whatever commonalities may exist or whatever you think about a person, right? So we all profile each other, okay? But me, in my role as a profiler, is my job is to try to look for things that are relevant to a crime. Now, what does that mean? What I'm doing is looking for motive. In other words, what I'm doing is I'm looking for why. So why were certain things done in the commission of a violent crime or a homicide? Well, I guess that's violent too. Why were these things done? Why was that young woman shot 3 times in the back and twice in the back of the head? How many times do you have to be shot to get killed? Because the coroner said that any one of those shots, or certainly 3 of them, in all probability, would have killed her. Okay, so why shoot her 4 more times, right? So that's the kind of thing we're looking for. Why? Now, when we were trained, and I don't know if there's any former law enforcement people that I'm talking to right now, but if there are any in the group, you will acknowledge this statement is absolutely correct, because when we go through a law enforcement academy, then one of the basic things that we're taught in solving crime is that you have to look at 5 different factors. you have to look at who, and that's the who part is the victim, who, why is the last thing, but who, what, when, where, how, and that's the 5 things that we look for. And at the end of the list is the why. Okay, so there's 5 different things, but then there's one that's almost not considered because it's at the bottom of the list, and that's why. What does why tell us? Why did somebody commit a crime? Why did they do or not do the things that we would have expected someone to do? What does why tell us? Oftentimes, it might tell us motive. Okay, what was the motive behind that individual's desire to do what he was doing or she doing? Okay, let me give you an example of that. I'm not going to state the name of the case, but I was involved, well, still am, of a case down in, let's say, southwestern Colorado, Four Corners area. Excuse me, I drink water. In which a 13-year-old boy was killed and went missing, was down there visiting his father. The boy went missing. Nobody knew what happened. And so about 1.5 years later, body parts started turning up in the mountains above the town. Okay, so the skull, parts of the arm, and other, so I'm hesitating here because I don't want to get into too much depth and find this in the paper tomorrow, but various body parts were found. Okay. They then looked and found that some of the body parts had initially been placed behind a log right off a path, which was leading away from a huge area where they parked snowmobiles and even boat trailers for using Vallecito Lake or for just snowmobiling around on the mountain. So the body parts were found there. They conducted a search. They found additional evidence, parts of clothes and so forth. And so they weren't really sure what they had. One of the theories was that there was a sex offender, perhaps, that was going through town and somehow ran into the boy, which is, I think, unlikely because the house where he was staying at, his dad's place, was quite a ways north of town, way out of town. Okay, so that seems unlikely. It was off on a kind of forsaken road. So they called me. The prosecutor on the case had heard me give a talk on profiling at the Colorado State Rocky Mountain District Attorneys Association meeting up in Steamboat Springs several years ago. And he said, why don't you guys get a hold of this guy, Pete, and see maybe if he can, give us some insight into this case. So anyhow, I worked on it for a while, and then I decided I better go down there. You kind of need to get the lay of the land, and did. The detective, the primary detective, threw me in the car, and away we went. And he took me out and was showing me around, and then said, "Okay, now I'll take you to where the body was found." And we went up this road, and you all know, I assume, what roads that go up the side of mountains are like. There can be a steep drop off, or rises the other way, and somehow they managed to get a road built in there. And that's exactly what we went through. We went up the mountain and we kept going. We had a couple of switchbacks naturally, but I kept looking over the side, and what really struck me, it was like an epiphany of what I didn't realize, is that if the person that killed this boy was a stranger that wanted to hide the body. Remember what we were talking about in the case in West Branch? The girl's body was left on a county road where it would be found. Okay, this body was placed where it would ultimately be found, but my thought was, and I told the prosecutor and detective this, that if I'm the killer and I'm seeing this steep hillside, I would get the body out of my vehicle and roll it down the hillside, and it would never be found. Animals would do whatever they do, and so the body would never be found. Then it was placed in a location where ultimately it would be found. So what is that telling me? Well, what that's telling me is I'm dealing with somebody who knew the victim. Okay, now let's digress back to the Roth case. We've got a victim, and there's one of our clues of a body laying out in a place where the body's going to be found. And they add one other fact to our pattern in that case, and that is there was something like a pillow under her head, right? Some gloves or mittens, and a coat over the body. Why would somebody do that? I mean, if we got a serial killer running around in Iowa and he picks up a girl and he takes her out and shoots her in the head, in the back, and she lays down on a county road that's traveled and put a blanket, a coat over her, and puts her at a place of rest in a location where her body is going to be found. If I'm a serial killer, you're never finding that body. But if I'm a serial killer, why am I killing her? Money? No. Sexual assault? Often the motive? No. Because of some other depravity or fetish, paraphilia, whatever you choose to call it. Sadistic nature? No. Nothing like that done to the victim. Okay, so there is a little addition to our fact pattern in the West Branch case. In the other case, down in the Four Corners area, ultimately that and some of my other conclusions about the case led to the father being arrested. And I'm not convinced he did it on purpose. I think they were roughhousing and had a accident inside the house. His head may have hit a corner of the couch, and he was knocked out or actually killed, probably. And then the father got in a panic, didn't know what to do, and up the mountain he went. So that's what my opinion was and remains, and as far as I'm concerned, is right. And they agree with that too. Okay, so what we're doing there is, as I mentioned, we're looking for the why of things. Why did somebody do something? But in that case, in the Four Corners, then to me, it was actually more important that why didn't he do something? Why didn't he dispose of the body such that it would never be found? And then if that was a stranger killing, he's already eliminated himself as a suspect, if he ever became one. Where's the body, you know? So in any event, the father was arrested. He is still awaiting trial after X number of years, which has been very frustrating to many of us. You don't need why to convict a person. You don't have to have motive. Okay, but why is very important in the process of solving an awful lot of these cases. Why did he shoot her in the head twice and in the back 3 times? What does that tell me? Well, what it does is it talks about some of the characteristics that I look for when it comes to behavioral facts involved with an investigation. Okay, so the things I look for from the crime scene, and Rarely have I ever gone to a crime scene as a profiler. I was in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. If anybody knows where that is, it's to hell and gone, literally, out in Iowa, about way out in the eastern part of the state. And then my headquarters was in Omaha, so that was 260 miles away. And if I had to go somewhere in Nebraska, which I did occasionally, they'd call me and say, Pete, we got one here. Then heaven knows how many more miles I would add on, potentially another 200. Unless it was in Scottsbluff, then I'd be traversing the entire 2 states, which was closer to 650 miles. So in any event, what we're trying to do is to determine why certain things are done. We're trying to identify such things as the offender's sex, and if we've got a woman killed, ordinarily it's going to be a man. If we've got an unknown killer, in all likelihood, it's going to be a man. Okay, so we'll try to determine the race, and these things over the years. Boy, is that a sensitive topic right now, but you know, that's the statistics behind it, is these types of crimes tend to be race on race. We're trying to determine the approximate age of the person that did the killing. Should be able to tell you something about their intelligence level, and maybe even couple that with their educational level or the type of job they may have. You know, maybe they've got a blue collar type of job, or perhaps maybe in more of an executive position, probably a higher level of intelligence level involved, not necessarily absolute, but anyhow. So the other thing then that I will look at, in addition to those things at a crime scene, would be any indication that the person spent a considerable amount of time, let's say it's involving a house, then did the killer spend an inordinate amount of time inside the house? What's inordinate? Inordinate. Well, let's take bank robberies, for example. I worked a lot of bank robberies over the years. And if you're a bank robber, then your goal is to go in, get the money, leave. That's it. Okay, so if you are a killer, your goal is to go in to commit whatever other crimes you're going to commit inside or wherever it may be, then to dislodge yourself from that situation, okay, to get away from being identified as the person that killed that victim. So that's very important, that if a person spent time inside the place, then something it tells me is that he was familiar with the area. Why does that tell me that? Well, in one sexual assault case that I had, there was evidence that the suspect sexually assaulted a 68-year-old woman and committed 2 sexual assaults on her and ejaculated 2 times. Okay, so what that told me at the time was he had to spend a little bit of time there, because once you do that, then ordinarily you're not ready to do it, you know, that quickly. Things got to happen. So he had to have spent a fair amount of time there. I'm going to say another 15, 20 minutes, but there was also some evidence that he had made a pot of coffee while he was there and had drank some coffee. So that means he's pretty comfortable. Why is that important? Well, here's why it's important. Because he knew that if any danger signs showed up to him that might get him caught, then he knew how to get out of that place, to go down the alley, take a right turn at the dumpster, a left turn at the next street by the tree, and away he goes and he's free. Okay, so he knows the most direct route to get himself to a position of safety. So now these are, by the way, subconscious things that people don't even think of, such things as leaving a body in a place where it's going to be found. Okay, let's go back to that case in West Branch. Why is that important? Leaving the body in a place where it's going to be found. Well, in a, I guess, psychological sense, there could be a couple reasons. I guess the one I consider and have always considered is that they really do want the body to be found so that the family can conduct funeral services and have a Christian burial and do the normal grieving that people would do. Okay, so there again, a psychological motive, subconscious type of motive, something that they didn't think of, but if we're trained properly, and we are, or at least most of us were, that you can identify as a behavioral clue. Okay. Now, having said that, there are also things that may happen after a crime is committed, because I don't know about you, but excuse me, getting a raspy throat. I don't know about you, but if I committed a murder, then that would put me on a different plane, a different edge than I normally am, because I'm usually a relatively calm critter. And but that would put me on edge. What would I do? Well, would I have increased anxiety? Yeah, you think? All the way up to the level of paranoia? Yeah. Walking down my head, walking down the street, my head would look like an owl, turning around and seeing what was there. And every cop car I'd see, oh my God, they're coming to get me. Okay, so any sudden interest in the media, okay, and the person never really did pay much attention to watching the news, all of a sudden is paying attention to the news and even reading the newspaper, maybe even saving some of the clips out of the newspaper. So they find things that are cut out of the paper. It's like, what is up with him, right? Seeing these things. Mood swings, irritability, isolating oneself in their room, so becoming a hermit, essentially. And in addition to that, not getting out of the house very much, but when they do, perhaps going to the store, liquor store, picking up some alcohol to self-medicate, maybe developing a sudden religious interest, right? Well, I grew up Catholic and don't be offended, but I'm kind of a recovering Catholic at this point in my life. I really don't go to church an awful lot. So if somebody hears that Pete started to go to 6 o'clock mass every morning and he started to drink quite a bit, and then that would be a clue that I did something, because I don't drink. And so if you've got those two things factored in, then up against the wall, Pete, what did you do, right? Because I did something. So let me just go into a couple more things, and then we'll solve this case of the Roths. Criminal profiling is only a tool, right? It's a part of an investigation. It is not a substitute for a full and complete investigation. Okay, so you've got some people who would like to cut to the chase, and we've got a homicide. It occurred 2 or 3 days later. Let's call Pete and get him out here and see if he can solve it, and cut to the chase here and cut our losses, so to speak. Okay, so we don't do that. I won't do that. They've got to have a pretty thorough investigation done. before I will get involved in a criminal case. Because my job is really not to solve the case so much as to provide some clues, perhaps, that might help them. Now, okay, let me go back to the Roth case that we started with, and I'll wrap it up with what happened with that. Everybody in the family alibied everybody else. The mom said, well, I don't know, we were just sitting around watching TV. The 14-year-old daughter said, yeah, I was watching TV. 12-year-old son, yeah, I was watching TV. The stepdad, yep, I was there. We were all watching something on TV. The 19-year-old girl, of course, she didn't have much to say because she was dead, but she, according to them, said, well, I'm gonna go down to the convenience store and get a pack of cigarettes. Okay, so given the fact pattern that we've got, the 2 shots in the back of the head, 3 in the back, indicate anger. That could mean general anger, that the person tends to be an angry type of a person, and I can go into great depth on that, but won't, what that means. Or that they have specific anger directed toward that individual, the victim, okay? See it on TV all the time. It makes me madder than a hornet. I've thrown more shoes at TVs. My wife gets really mad at me, but every time I hear the word Vic, that makes me nuts, because that's it's disgraceful. If my wife or anybody that was a relative of mine got killed or even injured, seriously, and I heard a cop referring to them as the Vic, then that cop would be the next Vic. I mean, they'd be on their butt, because that's just inexcusable to do that. But it's become part of our modern lexicon right now. So if you're writing that kind of thing in a book, and you're writing mystery type things, and you've got cops or FBI agents involved, please don't use that word. Because if I read your book, I'm going to write you a note and say, you're a bonehead. Okay. And I would expect to get that kind of a note myself. Okay, so everybody alibied everybody else, right? Well, what we find actually happened was the stepfather had left the house, went outside, told the wife, and none of them were paying attention, said, well, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to have a cigarette. Well, went out, jumped in his truck, took off, went over to the convenience store, and talked the 19-year-old daughter into going for a ride with him. Why would he do that? Because he wanted to continue the affair that they'd been having since she had turned 18. So that was about a year and a half's worth of affair. Okay, so he wanted to continue and drove out toward the country, and she said, no, I'm not interested, don't want to anymore. And so he stopped and said, well, then fine, you walk back to town. Fine. And she got out of the vehicle and was walking toward town. He stopped the pickup truck he was driving, got his .22 caliber, which slugs were found in her body and in her brain, and walked up behind her as she was walking toward town. Remember what I said, a little bit of common sense in these things too. Her head was pointed toward town, meaning she was walking that way, right? And so consequently blasted her 3 times in the back, twice in the back of the head. What does that mean? Anger. And why was he angry? Because she was going to cut him off. She wanted to stop. He didn't want to stop. Okay. So the deep down psychological things of him covering her up, why would he do that? Okay, doesn't that give a clue? Yeah, it gave me some big clues that it had to be somebody that she knew, because who would care for her enough on a cold, freezing night other than somebody she knew to put a blanket or a coat over her body to keep her warm, quote unquote. She's dead. But again, very, very deep subconscious things going on here and with many, many other things I've worked on. And secondly, how about the pillow under her head? The pair of gloves that were soft and provided, a spot for her to rest her head. Okay, so those were some of the things, coupled with what I had said: no sexual assault, no other type of assault to the victim, nothing else done, nothing sadistic done to the victim. So consequently, it had to have been somebody that was close to her, and that somebody turned out to be the stepfather. Probably not hard to figure that out. Okay, so I finished where I wanted to get, and actually I wanted to go a little farther, but I'm almost perfectly on time. That never happens with me, and so I'm very proud of myself. So Bruce, do you want to turn me back on, or should I turn me back on?
No, I'm on. Aren't I on? I think I'm on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I had some questions come in. I've had a couple of questions myself. Let me just hit a couple of questions here. One was sort of interesting. The person wanted to know whether you, as a younger person, read mystery fiction. It seems as if a profiler thinks the same way a mystery writer does about characters of the villain. Did you have any?
Oh, that is really a good question. That is a very good question. Okay, so this thing says my internet connection is unstable. Okay.
Well, you might still want to
actually,
Pete, you might still want to keep your video off just to keep your voice clear. You were doing well there with it off. So
okay.
That's okay. Yeah, there you go.
All right, there we go. Anyhow, that is a good question. I did not grow up reading The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I more grew up reading, I loved biographies, particularly sports biographies when I was a young kid. I loved reading, and I'd read about anything I could get my paws on. I know in high school they wanted us to read certain books they would designate. In my high school, it was A Tale of Two Cities. Well, that's a wonderful book, but it really wasn't the book I wanted to read, because I wanted to read one about Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays or somebody of that nature. So I would read like crazy, but of things that are interesting to me. And I'm still the same way. I'm still a voracious reader. I always loved to write. From the time I was, 12, 13, 14 years old, our teacher would say, okay, class, here's a topic, and I would like you to write a paragraph on this topic. So, 10 minutes would go by, everybody's got their pencil on the desk, and Sister Barbara would say, Peter, are you ever going to be done? Yes, sister, tomorrow. But in any event, I've always loved reading. I've always loved writing. It's in my DNA. My mom was a wonderful writer, not published. My dad was a wonderful writer, very bright guy. They were both very bright people. And so, it's in my DNA. I think my daughter is one too.
Do you actually read mystery fiction, or is that what they call a busman's holiday? You have enough of it in real life that you don't really want to read those as books.
Now?
Yeah, these days, yeah.
I do. I've got a few favorite authors. One is actually a friend of mine, Andrew Gross, and you've heard of Andy. He is really a good writer, and he writes mystery fiction that's really good. Nelson DeMille is one of my favorites. If you've never read anything by him, Nelson DeMille and I are doppelgangers, I think. We don't look alike, but we write alike because he's very silly and irreverent, and I am too. In fact, if you were to acquire my first book, which was FBI, I've done 4, so it's hard to remember, FBI Diary Profiles of Evil, then inside that book, which is very insightful because it gives the reader a insight into what training we received as profilers at the academy, and then takes us out into the field, specifically me. It's a bit of a biography, just I guess a slice of that period of my life. And okay, fine, now you got the training. What do you do with the training? And so that's what that book is pretty much about, with one spectacular murder case at the end, in which I did a profile that identified as one guy. There could only have been one guy that committed a crime. This is in Podunk, Nebraska, but there were literally 6 people that were convicted for the crime that only one could possibly have committed. 6 convicted. Of those 6 people, they served an aggregate of 75 years in state prison, and were ultimately cleared by DNA. This was back in the 50s. In the middle 80s, before DNA was available, I guess. It was just being invented. And so, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, they were all cleared by DNA, and they filed a huge lawsuit against the county and won a verdict giving them $27.1 million for their time served and for being wrongfully convicted. So, still not sure. Yeah.
Okay. Another question. So you had mentioned intelligence and education. So one of the questions is, what are some of the clues that would tell you as a profiler of the criminal's level of intelligence and education?
Involved in a crime of this nature of violence would be the amount of planning that was involved. If it was a very spontaneous type of crime, very impulsive, then that would indicate to me, as it did in this case involving the 6 people that were convicted, that would indicate to me that it was a younger offender. A very poorly planned, a messy crime scene, as I call it, indicating he was unable to get control of the victim, whereas a person that was smarter, like some serial killers, like BTK in Wichita, Ted Bundy, or many others, have to employ their intelligence, and they improve what they do. But a younger person does not have that same ability, and so not consider the next act they're going to do, because they don't even know another one. Whereas a serial killer of the nature I mentioned know that they're going to commit a kill, for example, who by all counts killed at least 48 women.
No. Okay. This question is one kind of related to a question I have too. Is Mindhunter an accurate portrayal of the early behavioral analysis unit?
Very good question. And I have, my wife and I just finished watching that, with all of us being stuck inside the house because of COVID. Just getting a drink.
Okay.
So we've searched through several things, and one that we really liked, just as an aside, was Ozark. I thought that was a great one. And then we found Mindhunters, and I said, look at that. I mean, I know John Douglas, who's in there. I know Bob Ressler. Ressler was a friend. Douglas, not really was a friend, but anyhow, yeah, that's exactly how things started. They went out and were interviewing people at prisons of their own volition, and starting to build up a body of knowledge, and that has us partly to where we're at right now. They then had us, they brought a number of us back, a cadre of us back for the original field profilers training. And then they tasked us with going to prisons and interviewing people there. Who were notorious or serial killers, and provide that information to them back at Quantico to a pretty good representation. And if you have, what is that? Not Stars, but I don't know, whatever it is, Netflix. If you have access to that, I'd recommend that. If you have any interest in this, it's pretty good.
Okay. I just wanted to piggyback on that. It was a question that had come to my mind. We've all, like this show, I've not watched this particular show, but we've certainly all read and seen shows and TV shows and movies about profilers or profiling. Are there a few things, just maybe a few highlights of what you see writers get wrong about profiling, you know, myths, misconceptions, things that are not accurate, just kind of maybe the most common ones that you've seen?
I am one of the few writers that I know of that writes about profiling. I guess it's because I know something about it. I do have friends that contact me more so about the FBI, questions about the FBI, and then some about profiling. But I don't really know. I haven't read any books I can think of where an author is writing about profiling. Other than me, my fourth book. I mean, if somebody wanted to write about profiling, oh Lord, get your hands on Profiling Violent Crime, a behavioral and forensic approach, which is to be and is a college textbook as of March of this past year. Right, yeah, exactly when COVID hit, that's when I had the grand opening for my book. Great timing. Not me, my publisher. But in any event, that is the first book that has been written by a non-academic person who actually was out in the real world doing this type of work. That would be me. And the other, my writing partner is a forensic psychologist, PhD, worked at Alcatraz for a number of years, now is the supervisor of corrections for Northern California. Tell me that's not some good experience. And Clarissa has been doing that for, I don't know, about 12 years. Extremely bright gal. So we both did chapters on our own. So that book is Profiling Violent Crime. If you've got a introduction thing that's got my name, rank, and horsepower on it that was provided to you,
Right.
Then all four of my books are in there. This is the last one that I've done. More coming, but that's the last one.
Another question that had come in is says the profile stereotype for serial killers always seems to be intelligent, introverted, white man, 25 to 40. Is that, the person is asking, is this really true in general, or is there really greater deviations in that than we typically hear, the Ted Bundys and that sort of thing?
Well, that's a Oh, I'm sorry, Bruce, did I cut you off?
No.
Okay. That actually goes back to the question that you asked earlier about intelligence level. How can you determine that type of thing? Yeah, a lot of those things are going to fit into a certain, the word probably isn't paradigm, but I'll say that, or a certain menu or a mixture of, this is generally what we're looking at, that type of a person. If we've got a serial killer, generally we're looking at somebody that's 30, 40 years old, because they've got the planning ability, the intelligence, and probably the money that they need to travel if they need to do that, to carry these things out. So yeah, while it does sound like a bit of a stereotype, there's probably some truth to it. There is truth to it.
Yeah. Margaret, can you hear me? I'm trying to hear Margaret there.
Yes, I can.
Oh, there you are.
hear
Okay.
you, Bruce.
I just wanted to jump in to ask you, I do have a couple more questions. Are you feeling okay with time? Do we want to cut it off now, or do you want to go a few more minutes, or what do you want to do?
If Pete is willing, I would love for him to keep talking.
Okay, I've got a couple more
Okay.
questions here in front of me.
Okay.
One is any cases that have truly stumped you, and why? And we don't really have the time, obviously, to go into any length about the case, but related to that, just on average, how long does it take to solve a case using these profiling techniques? Are we talking days, weeks, months? I was thinking of that in the question on the West Branch case you were involved with. So
Yeah, that was West Branch was just a matter of several days.
several days. Okay.
Yeah, and that's also a very good question, Bruce, because the answer to the last part of it, how long does it take? That's really hard to answer. It just depends on the facts. Are the facts changing? What type of new information are you getting? If anybody's been watching this on TV, they have had a series of the Atlanta child killings in which 29 or 30 young kids were killed down in Atlanta, back in the early to middle 80s. And the fact pattern kept changing because they'd find another victim and then something different about that. They'd have to add that and change what they knew, and the profile. Perhaps they had to change that a little bit. So that case wasn't solved for, I'm going to say, a good year, maybe longer than that, including, they were involved in the investigation. The profilers were. They are not the investigation. They're just it's like a piece of the pie, the profile is. Profiles don't solve a lot of cases. They add to the facts, and that helps, or doesn't sometimes. Now, the first part of your question, have I found anything that I've been stumped by? And I guess to answer that honestly, I could say every single case that I've dealt with, I've been stumped by. But my wife hates me to say this. She says, Pete, you're so arrogant. Well, okay, but those that I have worked on, and that's been a fair number, I'm going to say 20, 25, that I've worked on, I have yet to be wrong. So while, yeah, I was stumped and I was a bonehead and couldn't figure it out for a while, eventually I did, I guess. So
Okay.
that's my story.
Last question I have, unless I'm just checking the list here to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, I do have a couple. So somebody asked just about your opinion of today's FBI versus when you were active. It's sort of a broad question, but just in general, what your thoughts on how the FBI is operating versus the days you worked with it?
Boy, there could be a long answer to that, because a lot of the things that we're seeing right now, I literally retired 20 years ago. You know, if I look young, I'm not. I'm 75, or I will be in a few months. I claim 75, but I retired when I was 54, I believe. And I mean, it was a different FBI back then. I retired on 12/31/99, method to my madness at the end of the millennium. But if you think a few years ahead, then we had the date of 9/11/01, and the entire world, including the FBI, changed dramatically at that point. And I am so glad that I was retired, because the Bureau was just taking people from whatever they were doing, they didn't care, and put them on terrorism with no training. And so, you know, you would think, well, aren't the FBI agents trained to do everything? No, they're not. There's specific training involved to work terrorism and foreign counterintelligence cases. And anyhow, I think 9/11 and the aftermath of that, people went up in rank, and then we got into all this political falder-de-la that's going on right now. You know, with directors and all the goofball things that they're doing, and James Comey, and, you know, I don't know anything about the current guy, Christopher Robin, or I don't know what his name is, but anyhow, Christopher Wren, I think, not Robin.
Ray, I think it is, yeah.
Maybe Ray, yeah. But I mean, there is all kinds of stuff going on, because what I think happened is worse than probably what happened in the Bureau before, that they started elevating people that were in the foreign counterintelligence group or in the terrorism group, and knew absolutely nothing about anything else. And the FBI is tasked with investigating, I don't know now, but somewhere around 250 different violations, from bank fraud to bank robbery to Lord knows what. And that includes the theft of bird guano from the Aleutian Islands. Now, this is true, and that is on the statutes they investigate. So I'd be all about doing that. But in any event, just a lack of training and a lack of awareness, I think, of what the Bureau is supposed to be about got them into the situations they've been in lately, and it's been a mess. And I think everybody could acknowledge that, right? Some of the yahoos that they've trotted out. My second book, which is now off the market, it's about the FBI Academy, FBI Quantico. Anyhow, that's a book. Nobody has ever written one like it before. Bureau didn't like me very much for writing it. I told the truth about our training at the Academy. Very few people believe it, because everybody sitting out there listening to me has heard the famous terms highly trained federal agents. Well, guess what? We weren't. And we were very poorly trained. It was embarrassing. Other federal agencies were much better trained. And so when people get out of the academy, then they expect them to be a fully trained agent and able to do anything. And there's a lot to this story. I'm rewriting the book in some different ways, and then I'm going to re-release it. But people that get out of the academy don't have any idea what they're doing, trying to do the job. I happened to be one. I was a cop for 10 years, so put me on the street. I was still confused when I first started in the Bureau. You know, it's like, I didn't get trained how to write reports. I didn't get trained how to interview people. I didn't get trained how to collect evidence. I didn't get trained on all of these things that you would think, oh my gosh, the FBI gets trained in all that stuff. Wrong, we didn't. And that has continued. They were as described by a pundit from Washington, D.C., they were training their agents as they did back in the 30s to catch Bonnie and Clyde, and they're trying to catch Osama bin Laden. And that is a very truthful statement, that somebody knew what was going on. Bureau didn't ever know. So anyhow, that training, guys would get out of the academy, they wouldn't know what they were doing. As soon as they could, they'd apply for supervisor jobs. Nobody else wanted to be one. I got asked several times. I said, no, thanks. I have a hard enough time supervising myself. Thank you very much. And then, I stayed an agent out in the field, and I enjoyed that. That was what I like to do. But a lot of these guys went up in rank, and they didn't know what the Bureau was about. They didn't know what we did, how we do it, how you investigate cases. And so that's why we've had some of the problems. You can get out of the FBI. I've been out 20 years. It's not like the mafia. A lot of people think, well, yeah, I'm plugged into all that stuff, and I get, calls and people tell me stuff. No, and I don't have any desire to hear it, quite frankly. I'm just happy as I can be living in my COVID-infested house. I spent 4 years on submarines, guys. A lot of people complain about, oh, this quarantine, it's pretty nasty. I spent 4 years on submarines, I was well trained for quarantine. So yeah, I'm getting off track.
Okay, one last question. We need to wrap this up. The question is, at what point does a local law enforcement agency bring in the FBI for profile help? What are the triggers? And the West Branch case, I assume, is a good example of that, right? It was a local investigation, I assume, initially, and then at some point you were brought in. So just roughly, what is that process, and why would a local ask for FBI help?
Yeah. Famous but incompetent. I don't know who said that, but there's some truth to that. Not all of us were incompetent, but there's certainly a lot that were. There's really no direct criteria for that, Bruce, or whoever asked the question. If an agency needs assistance with an unsolved case, whether that is, let's say, a series of sexual assaults or homicide or a series of homicides, then they would request the Bureau's assistance. Now, the Bureau would then be obligated to look at, well, what do we have here? Do they already have a suspect? Do they already have the case solved? And they just want us to come in to confirm that they've got the right suspect. That happens. And then that's not what we want to do. We won't do that. But some unscrupulous defense attorneys will do that. And I've had defense attorneys contact me and ask me to do that. And, I do some consulting, and it's not for free. So if you want to pay me the money, I've done a couple of those. And the defense attorneys, then some of them didn't like me because I told them that their client looks like it's the person that did the crime. Well, that's not what I wanted you to say. I don't care what you wanted me to say. I want to tell you the truth. If you don't like it, stick it in your ear. I'll bill you another $1,000 or something.
Okay, thank you much. That's all our questions. Margaret, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much. I don't have to pull anything out of my ear, okay? I liked what you had to say. I could have listened but we do have to kind of wrap up here. Thank you so much for coming, Pete. And Bruce, thanks so much for being moderator tonight. We really appreciate it.